Iowa's quiet fields and winding rivers hide a much deeper past than most people realize. Long before modern towns, ancient communities shaped the land with mounds, sacred stone sites, and vast villages tied to trade, ritual, and belief. These mysteries reveal a complex world that rose, thrived, and faded, leaving subtle clues still etched into Iowa's landscape. Toolsboro Mounds. The Toolsboro Mounds sit on a high terrace overlooking the Mississippi River in southeastern Iowa. At first glance, they don't look dramatic. There are no towering stone walls, no carved monuments, no obvious signs of complexity, just long, low rises in the ground, softened by grass and time. That quiet appearance is exactly what makes this place unsettling. Everything about the Toolsboro Mounds suggests intention, careful planning, and a level of organization that doesn't line up with how ancient Midwestern societies were once imagined. These mounds were built roughly 2,000 years ago, during what archaeologists call the Hopewell interaction sphere. That term sounds technical, but what it really describes is something remarkable. A loose network of Native American cultures spread across much of eastern North America, all connected through trade, shared symbolism, and ceremonial practices. Toolsboro was one of the westernmost major sites in that network. That alone raises questions. Why here? Why choose this specific stretch of land above the Mississippi? The location matters. The river below wasn't just a waterway, it was a highway, a boundary, and a spiritual presence. From the mountaintops, you can see far across the floodplain. It's easy to imagine people standing there, watching canoes move along the river, watching the sun rise and fall, watching the seasons change. This wasn't hidden ground. It was chosen to be seen, at least by those who knew where to look. Originally, the Toolsboro complex included at least 7 major mounds, some of them massive by regional standards. The largest measured more than 130 feet long and over 20 feet high. These weren't piled up quickly. Each mound represents countless hours of labor, basket by basket of earth, carried and placed by hand. That kind of work doesn't happen casually. It requires leadership, coordination, and shared purpose. Excavations in the late 19th century revealed some of the most intriguing clues. Inside several mounds, archaeologists found stone-lined burial chambers, not simple graves, but carefully constructed spaces made from limestone slabs fitted together like crude masonry. Inside were human remains accompanied by grave goods that still surprise researchers today. Copper ornaments hammered into thin sheets, mica cut into precise shapes, marine shells that originated from the Gulf Coast, and obsidian traced back to the Rocky Mountains. None of these materials exist naturally in Iowa. Their presence at Toolsboro means long-distance trade routes were active centuries before. European contact, not occasional trade, but sustained connections maintained over generations. This raises one of the central mysteries of Toolsboro. What kind of society could maintain these networks without cities, without written language, without wheeled transport? The traditional image of small, isolated tribes doesn't fit here. Toolsboro suggests something more fluid and expansive, a ceremonial economy where ideas and sacred objects moved across the continent, binding distant communities together. Not everyone buried at Toolsboro was treated the same. Some graves were rich with offerings, while others were simple or empty. That points to social hierarchy, but not in a way that's easy to define. There's little evidence of permanent elites living in palaces, no fortified villages. If power existed here, it may have been temporary or ritual-based authority, tied to ceremony rather than control. That leads to another puzzle. Archaeologists have found surprisingly little evidence of everyday life at the mound site. No clear domestic structures, no trash pits filled with daily debris. That suggests Toolsboro wasn't a village. It was a destination, a place people traveled to for specific purposes, then left behind. So what happened there? One possibility is seasonal gatherings. Groups may have come together at certain times of year for rituals tied to the agricultural cycle, the movement of the sun, or ancestral remembrance. The mounds could have functioned as stages for ceremony, processions, or storytelling. The dead buried there may not have been local at all, but chosen individuals brought from far away. Some researchers have suggested astronomical significance. While Toolsboro doesn't show the obvious animal shapes seen at effigy mounds further north, the orientation and spacing of certain mounds hint at alignment with solar events. These ideas remain debated, but the builders clearly understood the landscape in a symbolic way. The placement feels deliberate, not random. There's also the question of time. The mounds weren't built all at once. Evidence suggests they were added to, expanded, and modified over generations. That means Toolsboro remained important for centuries. Traditions were maintained. Stories were passed down. People returned again and again to the same sacred ground. Then, at some point, it stopped. By around 400 AD, the Hopewell tradition across much of North America faded. Long-distance trade networks collapsed, and ceremonial centers like Toolsboro were abandoned. No clear signs of conflict explained the shift. There's no evidence of invasion or destruction here. It looks more like a gradual change in beliefs, social structures, or environmental conditions. The disappearance is one of the most haunting aspects of the site. A complex system existed, thrived, and then quietly dissolved, leaving behind earthworks and questions. European settlers arrived centuries later, unaware of what lay beneath the ground. Farming took its toll. Several mounds were flattened or damaged before their significance was recognized. Early excavations, driven more by curiosity than preservation, disturbed burials and removed artifacts with little documentation. By the time protection came, much had already been lost. What remains today is only a fraction of the original complexer. Few mounds preserved and interpreted through a small visitor center nearby. Walking the site now feels subdued. There are no crowds, no dramatic signage, just wind moving through the grass and the steady presence of the river below. And yet there's a weight to the place. Standing on one of the surviving mounds, it's hard not to think about the people who stood there before, people who understood this land intimately, who saw the river not as a boundary but as a connection, who invested immense effort into shaping the earth for reasons we can only guess at. Toolsboro doesn't offer easy answers. It doesn't fit neatly into narratives of progress or decline. Instead, it reminds us how much of North America's ancient history remains incomplete, how many societies rose and fell without leaving written records, yet left marks on the land that still endure today. The site is peaceful, even ordinary to the untrained eye. But that's part of the mystery. Toolsboro doesn't announce itself. It waits, holding on to traces of belief systems, social networks, and human intentions that were once vibrant and deeply meaningful. In the end, the Toolsboro Mounds aren't mysterious because of what's hidden underground. They're mysterious because of what they reveal on the surface. A reminder that complexity, connection, and ceremony shaped this continent long before recorded history, and that much of that story is still waiting to be understood. Gichi Manitu State Preserve. The Gichi Manitu State Preserve sits in the far northwest corner of Iowa, pressed up against the South Dakota border, and it feels like a mistake on the map. This part of the state isn't supposed to look like this. Iowa is known for rolling farmland, deep soil, and soft horizons. But here, the land breaks open. Stone rises straight out of the ground, ridges cut sharply across the prairie. The terrain feels older, harder, and less forgiving. That difference is exactly why Gichi Manitu has drawn people here for thousands of years. The stone itself is the starting point. Quartzite dominates the preserve, and it is among the oldest exposed rock formations in North America. It formed nearly 1.7 billion years ago, long before plants, animals, or even complex cells existed. What you're walking on at Gichi Manitu predates almost all life on Earth. That kind of age is difficult to grasp, but it matters. Quartzite is incredibly dense and durable, which is why it resisted erosion while surrounding rock wore away. The result is a rare geological island, a spine of ancient stone rising above a much younger landscape. For ancient people, this wasn't just unusual geology, it was a resource of immense value. Archaeological evidence shows humans were using this site at least 7,000 years ago, and likely earlier. Stone tools, flakes, and quarry scars tell a clear story. People came here specifically to work the quartzite. They knew where to strike it, how to shape it, and how to turn it into tools that would last. Quartzite from Gichi Manitu has been found far beyond the preserve itself. That means stone extracted here traveled across the region, carried by people who understood its quality and durability. This wasn't random movement. It points to established travel routes, shared knowledge, and long-standing traditions passed down through generations. But Gichi Manitu doesn't behave like a simple quarry site. There's no evidence of permanent settlement. Here no clear house remains, no storage pits or village layouts. People didn't live here year-round. They came with intention, stayed for a time, and left. That pattern mirrors what we see at other ancient sacred sites across North America. Places that were visited, not occupied. Used, but not owned. The name itself offers a clue. Gichi Manitu comes from the Dakota language and is commonly translated as Great Spirit or Place of the Spirits. While translations vary, the meaning is consistent across traditions. This land was considered sacred. The stone wasn't just useful, it was powerful. The landscape reinforces that idea in subtle ways. The quartzite ridges form natural corridors and enclosed spaces. Sound behaves differently here. Wind funnels through narrow gaps, then drops away suddenly. The prairie feels distant, even though it's only a few steps beyond the stone. These sensory shifts matter. Sacred places across cultures often share this quality of separation, where the environment itself signals that you've entered a different kind of space. In many indigenous belief systems, stone is not inert. It holds memory, it carries spirit. Removing stone from the earth isn't a neutral act. It requires permission, ceremony, and respect. It's possible that toolmaking at Gichi Manitu was accompanied by rituals we no longer understand, gestures, offerings, or spoken traditions that left no physical trace. The site's location also suggests it played a role in movement and communication. Gichi Manitu sits near natural travel corridors, linking the plains to river systems farther east. Groups moving across the region would have known this place well. It may have functioned as a waypoint, a meeting ground, or a shared landmark recognized by different cultures over time. That long continuity is one of the site's most intriguing aspects. The artifacts found here spanned thousands of years and multiple cultural traditions. That means Gichi Manitu remained important even as societies changed, languages shifted, and belief systems evolved. The specific meanings may have altered, but the place itself retained significance. Eventually, that chain was broken. European settlers arrived with no understanding of the land's deeper role. Quartzite was valuable as building stone, and quarrying operations damaged parts of the preserve in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Artifacts were removed without documentation. Context was lost. Sacred ground was treated as raw material. In some ways, the stone resisted this erasure. Quartzite is hard to destroy. Quarrying is slow and difficult. Large portions of the site remained intact, simply because the rock refused to yield easily. That resistance helped preserve what we see today. Modern protection came late, but it came in time to save the core of the site. Today, Gichi Manitu State Preserve is small, quiet, and carefully managed. Trails wind through prairie grasses and along exposed ridges. Interpretive signs explain the geology and archaeology, but they can only go so far. They describe what was found, not how it felt to be here thousands of years ago. Walking the preserve now is a subdued experience. There are no dramatic overlooks or sweeping vistas. The power of the place is subtle. It's in the texture of the stone under your hand, the way the wind moves, the sense that this land doesn't need interpretation to justify itself. There is, however, a modern shadow that hangs over Gichi Manitu. In the late 20th century, the preserve became associated with violent crimes that deeply affected the surrounding community. For many people, that history is inseparable from the place. It adds another layer of unease, another reminder that human actions can mark even the oldest landscapes. But those events are recent, a brief moment compared to the thousands of years the site has been known, used, and respected. When you step away from the trailhead and into the stone corridors, that deeper timeline reasserts itself. What makes Gichi Manitu mysterious isn't the absence of information, it's the limits of interpretation. We can identify tools, we can date stone flakes, we can map quarry scars, but we can't reconstruct belief. We can't recover the stories told here, or the reasons certain groups returned again and again. And maybe that's the point. Some places were never meant to be explained fully. They were built to communicate messages across time. They existed because people recognized something in the land itself, concentration of age, material, and presence that didn't need justification. Gichi Manitu doesn't overwhelm you. It doesn't announce itself. It waits. The quartzite ridges have watched ice sheets retreat, grasslands rise, cultures form and dissolve. Human history is just a thin layer on top of something far older. Today, the preserve stands as a reminder that ancient mystery isn't always about lost civilizations or vanished cities. Sometimes it's about continuity, about how a single place can hold meaning across thousands of years without ever being fully claimed or defined. In the end, Gichi Manitu asks very little of the visitor. Walk slowly, pay attention, respect the stone. The rest of the story isn't written anywhere. It's held in the land itself, and it has no urgency about being understood. West Oak Forest Earth Lodge Site. The West Oak Forest Earth Lodge Site lies in the rolling hills of southwestern Iowa. Unlike places marked by towering stone or dramatic ruins, this site almost hides itself. There are no obvious monuments rising from the ground, no walls to photograph, no structures to walk through. What remains is subtle shallow depressions, soil patterns, and quiet traces that only make sense once you know what you're standing on. And that's exactly what makes West Oak Forest unsettling in its own way. It represents an entire way of life that once thrived here, then disappeared with almost no visible trace. The site dates to roughly 1250 to 1400 AD and is associated with what archaeologists call the Central Plains tradition. These were farming communities, not nomadic bands passing through. People lived here year-round. They raised crops, stored food, raised families, and buried their dead nearby. And yet, if you didn't know where to look, you could walk right over the remains of their homes without realizing it. The defining feature of West Oak Forest is the earth lodges themselves. These were semi-subterranean houses built by digging into the ground, erecting a framework of wooden posts, and covering it with layers of earth and sod. From the outside, an earth lodge looked less like a building and more like a low mound rising from the landscape. From the inside, it was warm, insulated, and surprisingly spacious. This kind of architecture tells us a lot. Earth lodges aren't temporary shelters. They require planning, cooperation, and long-term commitment to a place. Timber had to be gathered. Posts had to be placed carefully to support the roof. The earth covering had to be maintained year after year. These were homes meant to last. Archaeological evidence suggests that West Oak Forest was not a single house, but a village. Multiple earth lodges were arranged in a loose cluster, likely centered around shared outdoor spaces. Storage pits for corn and other crops have been identified, reinforcing the idea that agriculture was central to life here. This wasn't survival farming. It was organized production, enough to sustain a community through harsh winters. Corn was the backbone of this system, supplemented by beans, squash, hunting, and gathering. The surrounding forests and river valleys provided deer, small game, nuts, and wild plants. West Oak Forest sat in a carefully chosen location, close enough to fertile soil for farming, but also near wooded areas that offered resources and protection. Despite this stability, the site doesn't show signs of fortification. There are no defensive walls or palisades. That absence raises questions. Were these people living in a relatively peaceful time? Or did they rely on social networks, alliances, and mobility, rather than physical defenses? The lack of clear answers makes the site more intriguing. One of the most mysterious aspects of West Oak Forest is its position in time. This village existed during a period of major change across the Midwest. Other large earth lodge communities were forming and disappearing along river systems in Nebraska, Kansas, and the Dakotas. Some grew into large semi-urban centers. Others, like West Oak Forest, remained modest and then faded away. There's no evidence of violent destruction here, no burned layers, no mass graves, no signs of sudden abandonment. Instead, the picture that emerges is gradual decline. Houses were used, repaired, then eventually left behind. Fields returned to forest. The land absorbed the village quietly. Why that happened is still debated. Climate may have played a role. The late medieval period saw shifts in temperature and rainfall that could have made farming less predictable. Even small changes could destabilize communities dependent on corn agriculture. Another possibility is social change. Trade networks shifted. Alliances formed elsewhere. Younger generations may have moved toward larger population centers, leaving smaller villages behind. Disease is another factor archaeologists consider, though physical evidence is difficult to detect. A population drop from illness could have made maintaining the village impossible without leaving dramatic traces. What's striking is how completely West Oak Forest slipped out of memory. By the time European settlers arrived centuries later, there were no visible ruins to signal that a village once stood here. Farming and logging further erased surface clues. Earth lodges returned to earth. The site was rediscovered, not through legend, but through careful archaeological work. Subtle soil discolorations, post-hole patterns, and artifact scatters revealed the outlines of structures long gone. Pottery fragments, stone tools, and food remains provided glimpses into daily life. These artifacts are modest nor gold, no exotic materials from distant lands. That simplicity is important. West Oak Forest wasn't a ceremonial center like Toolsboro, and it wasn't a quarry like Gichi Manitu. It was ordinary life, and that makes it harder to romanticize, but more important to understand. Ordinary life is often what disappears first from history. The mystery here isn't about who built West Oak Forest. We know broadly which cultural tradition was responsible. The mystery is about how people lived, how they adapted, and why their way of life didn't continue in this place. Earth Lodge villages represent a balance between permanence and flexibility. They're rooted, but not immovable. When conditions changed, people could leave without leaving behind stone ruins or monumental architecture. That flexibility may have been intentional, a way of living that didn't trap future generations. Standing at the site today, that idea feels plausible. The land doesn't resist change, it accepts it. Trees grow where houses once stood. Wildlife moves through spaces that were once pathways between homes. Nothing feels disrupted, just layered. West Oak Forest today is part of a protected area, valued for both its natural and cultural history. Interpretive efforts explain what once stood here, but they rely heavily on imagination. You have to picture the lodge roofs rising from the ground, smoke drifting from central openings, children moving between houses, stored corn waiting out the winter. There's no way to fully reconstruct that world, and maybe that's appropriate. The people who lived here didn't build for permanence in the modern sense. They built for use, for family, for survival, and for connection to land that could sustain them for a time. In that way, West Oak Forest challenges modern assumptions about success and legacy. Nothing here failed. A community lived, adapted, and eventually moved on. The land recovered. The story continued elsewhere. The mystery of the West Oak Forest Earth Lodge site isn't dramatic, it's quiet. It asks you to consider how many similar villages once existed across the Midwest, supporting generations of people, and how few of them left visible marks behind. Today, the site reminds us that ancient history isn't always written in monuments and grand structures. It's also written in soil, in patterns barely visible, in places where life once unfolded normally and then passed on. West Oak Forest doesn't ask to be remembered loudly, it simply asks to be noticed. Blood Run National Historic Landmark. Blood Run National Historic Landmark sits quietly along the Big Sioux River on the border of Iowa and South Dakota. But for centuries, this place was anything but quiet. It was one of the largest and most important Native American settlements in the northern plains, a place where thousands of people gathered, traded, argued, celebrated, and mourned. Today, the land looks peaceful, tall grass, gentle slopes, a slow-moving river. But beneath that calm surface is one of the most complex and least understood ancient sites in the Midwest. Blood Run dates primarily from around 1300 to 1700 AD and is most strongly associated with the Oneota culture. Unlike earlier mound-building societies, the Oneota were part of a later wave of indigenous peoples who lived in large semi-permanent villages and relied heavily on farming, hunting, and regional trade. Blood Run wasn't a small settlement. At its peak, archaeologists believe several thousand people lived here or passed through regularly. The name Blood Run comes from a much later legend, often repeated in local history. According to the story, the river below the bluffs once ran red after a massive intertribal battle. Whether that specific event happened or not is impossible to prove, but the name stuck. What matters more is that conflict, diplomacy, and power all intersected here. Blood Run was a place where tensions and alliances shaped the future of entire regions. The site covers more than 500 acres and once included dozens of house remains, storage pits, and burial mounds. These mounds are not the large, towering constructions seen at earlier Hopewell sites. Instead, they are smaller, more numerous, and closely tied to village life. Some were burial sites. Others may have marked important social or spiritual boundaries. One of the most striking features of Blood Run is its location. The Big Sioux River was a major transportation route, linking the plains to woodland regions farther east. Trails converged here from multiple directions. People didn't just live at Blood Run, they came here intentionally. It functioned as a trade hub, a political center, and a ceremonial gathering place. Archaeological evidence supports this. Artifacts found at Blood Run come from across North America, shells from the Gulf Coast, copper from the Great Lakes, stone tools made from materials traced to distant regions. European trade goods also appear in later layers, including metal tools and glass beads. This shows that Blood Run remained active well into the period of early European contact. But what makes Blood Run especially mysterious is how it balanced scale and organization without becoming a city in the modern sense. There were no stone buildings, no walls, no central authority structure that archaeologists can clearly identify. And yet thousands of people coexisted here. That suggests a complex social system built on kinship, shared traditions, and negotiated power. Leadership may have been situational, shifting depending on trade, ceremony, or conflict. Decisions may have been made through councils rather than rulers. It's a form of organization that leaves few physical clues but requires deep cooperation. Blood Run was also a spiritual center. Oral traditions from descendant tribes describe the area as sacred ground. The river, the bluffs, and the surrounding prairie were all woven into belief systems that connected people to ancestors and the natural world. Burials at the site suggest care and ritual rather than hastad mattered here. At the same time, evidence of violence exists. Skeletal remains show signs of trauma. Fortified areas may have existed at different points in the site's history. Blood Run was not a peaceful utopia. It was a place where competition over resources, territory, and influence sometimes turned deadly. That dual nature is part of the mystery. Blood Run was defined by neither war nor peace alone. It was defined by interaction, a place where cultures met, clashed, merged, and reshaped each other. Then, sometime in the early 18th century, Blood Run was abandoned. This wasn't a sudden collapse. There's no clear destruction layer. Instead, occupation thins out. Trade goods become sparse. Houses stop being repaired. People leave. The reasons are debated, but several factors likely played a role. European diseases may have spread ahead of direct contact, devastating populations with no immunity. Shifts in trade patterns could have undermined Blood Run's role as a regional hub. Pressure from expanding tribes and colonial forces may have made the area unsafe or less desirable. Climate fluctuations could have stressed agriculture. What's clear is that Blood Run's disappearance mirrors a broader transformation across North America. Ancient trade centers gave way to new political realities shaped by colonial expansion. Landscapes that had been central for centuries became marginal almost overnight. After abandonment, the land returned to prairie. Later, settlers farmed it, unaware of what lay beneath the soil. Burial mounds were plowed down. Artifacts were collected without context. For much of its modern history, Blood Run was treated as just another piece of land. Recognition came late. Only in recent decades has the site been fully acknowledged for its significance. It is now a National Historic Landmark, jointly managed with respect to its cultural importance. Excavation is limited. Preservation comes first. Visiting Blood Run today is a quiet experience. There are no reconstructed villages, no dramatic displays, just trails, signage, and open land. You have to imagine the noise that once filled this place. Voices in multiple languages, dogs barking, fires burning, trade goods changing hands, ceremonies unfolding near the river. That contrast is powerful. Blood Run challenges the idea that complexity requires monuments. This was a major population center without stone architecture or permanent fortifications. Its power came from people, not buildings, from relationships, not walls. In that sense, Blood Run feels surprisingly modern. It shows how societies can be deeply connected, economically sophisticated, and culturally rich without leaving behind obvious symbols of dominance. The mystery of Blood Run isn't about whether it existed, that's certain. The mystery is how such an important place could fade so completely from common memory, how a site that once shaped regional history became nearly invisible. Today, standing above the river, it's easy to miss. The land doesn't announce itself, but if you know the story, the silence feels heavy. This was a crossroads of worlds, a place where the future of the plains was negotiated long before history books took notice. Blood Run reminds us that ancient North America was not empty, simple, or isolated. It was connected, dynamic, and alive with movement.